back. It was Red True Crime. So tonight starts the first installment of the weekly cases I'll be covering of unsolved missing children from the United States. So it'll be one case, or the oldest unsolved case from each state, once a week. So I'm going to cover these in basically chronological order. So I've started with the oldest case out of everybody in the 50 states, and we are tonight going to be talking about Victory Ploof. Interesting name, Ploof. So Victory Ploof, when she went missing, was 3 years old, and she went missing in 1879. So, which is one of the reasons why it's one of the oldest missing person cases out there. So, and it was an interesting case because there was so much conjecture as to what happened to her, because it brings in accusations of infidelity, um, pure meanness, murder, animal carnage. I mean, you name it, they were really throwing it out there. So we're going to go into a little bit of a background of her family before we get into the case itself. So in 1877, in West Jay, Vermont, Mitchell Ploof was at work clearing when he smelled smoke and heard rustling in the undergrowth. And what came out of the forest was just a horde of rabbits. And he was telling the story. Nobody believed him because within minutes of rabbits, it became other animals like squirrels, chipmunks, just wildlife was coming out. And what reason why was there was a forest fire coming through and it was forcing all those animals out. And he was interviewed by the local newspaper. And, that's how his name ended up in the paper. But that wouldn't be the only time that Mitchell Ploof would be making the news at that time. So a couple years later, um, he was back in the papers. So this would this time collapse his world again. And this is also when his daughter Victory went missing. So let's talk about what happened there. So Mitchell Ploof was born Michelet Plouffe in the province of Quebec. But when they immigrated to the US, they adopted the anglicized version of the name, which, became Mitchell Ploof. And they actually had settled in Worcester, Massachusetts. And the Ploufs were French Canadian, Catholic French Canadians. So at that time, French Canadians were not very well respected in the US, especially in New England. And with them being Catholic, it made it even worse. So there was a lot of, hello, everybody. There was a lot of anti Catholic rhetoric going on at that time in the US. And there was a massive 500,000 immigration of French Canadians into the New England area right after the Civil War. So everybody was not really thrilled about seeing these people there. So hello, everybody. Um, and one of the other reasons was they didn't like them is because they mostly spoke French, and nobody liked that. So while in Worcester, Mitchell Plouffe met Mary Bruno, who was another French Canadian immigrant. They married in 1868 and had 4 children, followed, Henry, George, Frank, and Melvina. Their fifth child, Victory, was born in 1876. Now, around this time, a sawmill opened up in West Jay, so it allowed a lot of people to move over to that area to start working and earning a living there in the U.S. So the thing is, though, the terrain was very mountainous and very wild and thickly wooded. So, with it being a plant, like, a tree plant, it allowed a lot of people who worked in lumberjacks and wood choppers, tons of woods, tons of work. So it was a good area to move to at the time. You were born, okay. So let's see. And then, the settlement grew quickly, and then Mitchell Plouffe and his family were among the many newcomers to the region, arriving in 1876 or 1877. Um, Now, when they first moved there, they were boarding with a woman named Julia Papineau. She was another French Canadian, but they looked at her as a half breed. I guess she was part Native American. So people just didn't like her because of that reason. Papineau was a longtime resident of the area, and there was another neighbor named John Bell. Now, John Bell did not get along with the Ploufs, but they kind of buried their grievances because they're his children, and the Bell children and the Plouffe children played together. So And it's also said that Bell was said to have a bad reputation among the locals, and he resented the newcomers coming to the area because he just was just anti French Canadian, I guess. So let's see. In 1877, the factory and the sawmill had been in operation for over a year. And the woods around West J must have resembled a moonscape of stumps and deadfalls. So I guess you could see where they had been cutting down the trees. Um, so at some point, they have another kid. Plouffe welcomed a sixth child named Alexander in April of 1878. And around a year later, that relationship with the woman they were boarding with, Julia Papineau, just really went bad. So Mitchell Plouffe started, got some land and started building his own cabin for his family. So at this point, he's got like six kids, a wife and six kids. So when he went to go work on the log cabin, his older sons were with him, helping him. And they're all out there playing, the kids were, including Victory. Now, Victory at the time was 3 years old. It was kind of cold, and she had a whooping cough. So she was not dressed for the weather. She was out there, no shoes, just being a 3 year old, collecting beech nuts. And her brother closest to her, Frank, did not want to deal with her because the other ones had ran off and Frank got left behind with Victory. And they say he hauled off and slapped her across the face and said, "Go home. I don't want to play with you." So, and he leaves. And nobody knows what happened to Victory after that point because it gets to be lunchtime. Everybody comes home. There's no Victory. None. And the parents are, of course, beside themselves because they're like, where is she? She's 3 years old. Where could she have gone? So when they finally realize she's missing, they go look for her. And they talk to John Bell, who's the neighbor, because he lived really, really close. And he's saying it had to be a bear. I think a bear took her. What this is, I'm talking about Victory Plouffe. She is one of the oldest unsolved missing child cases in the U.S. She went missing in 1879 from West J, Vermont. That's what I'm talking about. So they sound the alarm. The entire community comes out. They start looking for this kid. They're all over the woods. They're looking. They're saying like 500, 600 people came out looking for this child. No sign of her whatsoever. John Bell goes back about this bear story. He's like, I think a bear came and got her. And he's ridiculed for it because they're like, no, because if there was a bear, one, you would have heard her scream, and two, there'd be blood and torn clothing, and there's none of that. So no idea. So at that point, they're looking and there's some speculation going on as to what happened to her. And it was getting late, and eventually they stopped looking because on October 28th, so she went missing October 21st. On October 28th marked 1 week since Victory's disappearance. And once after that week, the sheriff, the attorneys, justices at that point come down and they charge um, John Bell and Julia Papineau with the disappearance of Victory Plouffe. So it's crazy how this all works out, but so this is their decision. In view of the extensive search and the absence of any clue whatever, the presumption is fair that the child was watched and upon the disappearance of the older children was either carried away or killed. So they are saying that somebody either kidnapped her or killed her and did away with the body. One of the two. So, and at that time, this was not an unheard of thing because in May of 1874, a 14-year-old named Jesse Pomeroy of South Boston was arrested for the murder of 4-year-old Horace Millen. And he had lured the boy away from his home and killed him during the daylight. So you already have precedents for this, even at that point. So she goes missing in 1879, 5 years earlier. Jesse Pomeroy of South Boston does the same darn thing. So, but things like this, they had to keep things in mind. So John Bell was 100 yards away from where Victory was when she disappeared and had no alibi for the time in question. He didn't help himself either, as he continued to insist that Victory had been attacked by a bear, even though there was no evidence to show that. So the officials put John Bell under arrest and searched his house and property, but they didn't find anything. Then they arrested Julia Papineau too, because she was known to have threatened the Ploufs in the past, and the relations with her lawyers were bad. And she was likely made. Actually, she probably got even more abused because of the fact that she was not white in their eyes. So, public hearing was held in West J, in which John Bell and Julia Papineau were denied all involvement. And John Bell's son Edson came forward with new information. Edson, who was 10 at the time, told the justice that his father had sent him to the Papineau house to borrow a sickle between 11 a.m. and noon on the morning of Victory's disappearance. Well, he entered the house and was surprised to find a well-dressed man seated at the table with a writing pencil and a book. And the kid didn't recognize the guy. And again, because this is the kind of a town, it's a very small community, everybody knows everybody. And he didn't recognize the man and hadn't seen him since. And it was implied that the stranger had traveled to West J to take Victory away with him. So this is where the mother starts getting blamed for her disappearance. Like, this is when they say, "Oh, Mary Ploof was a adulterous whore, and this guy was really Victory's father, so he came and took her away." So that was one theory right there. Another one was she was a bad mother, had a very bad temper, and smacked her child too hard and killed it and buried it and did something like that. Those were two theories that they came up with the mother. So once Edson Bell gave this evidence, that's when they dragged Mary Ploof up there and questioned her. I mean, jurisprudence and all that so did not exist in 1879. It just didn't. There was no innocent until proven guilty. None of that was even at play at this point. It was kind of like they were one step away from literally burning her at the stake. I mean, yeah. I mean, they were only 200 years away from the Salem witch trials at this point. So they get her on the stand. She breaks down sobbing, won't answer the questions as to who the man was. All she kept saying was Edson's lying, and but the thing is, maybe he was lying, but maybe he wasn't. Because again, none of it could be proven or disproven. So it did not look good for the Ploufs. So the judge had very little choice, and because there was no evidence found to implicate anyone, and nothing at all to suggest what had actually happened to Victory, um, they had to just end the trial. So, so basically, Mary Plouf's emotional outburst, they're saying, was taken as an admission of guilt. And the community turned on her in the papers too. A child was missing, so they had to blame somebody. So this is from the Sun newspaper. Suspicion also attached to the mother of the child, who is reported to be very quick-tempered and apt to strike one of her children when angry with anything upon which she can lay her hands. Many persons were of the opinion, and are so still, that in a moment of passion she struck the child a fatal blow and then hid the body to cover up the crime. So that was another theory they came up with. Other rumors were Mary had staged a kidnapping, Mary sold the kid, Mary was an adulteress and returned Victory to her biological father, which I've already mentioned. So, yeah, but she kept saying he was lying. Edson Bell was lying. And in the days that followed, it emerged that the boy had probably mistaken the date. More likely, he had visited the Papineau house on the 24th rather than the 21st, in which case the well-dressed stranger was most certainly a journalist. So it could have been a reporter. And then, but the damage was done. This family's reputation was thrown to the wayside, and as well as the neighbors. The landlady and the neighbor, all of them were under speculation. All of them continued to be scrutinized even after this whole thing went down. So the belief is that Victory either had been accidentally or otherwise killed and secreted, or that she had been kidnapped or given away by her parents. And they said the latter was basically creating sympathy and aid in their extreme poverty, that the child is without doubt in good keeping and is being better cared for than it could have been with its own parents. I don't know about that. I don't think the family was broke per se, but because they were building a house there and they had bought property, so they did have some money. Um, But again, because the family was French Canadian and there was a lot of prejudice at that time, I think a lot of it was put out there to make them just look as horrible as possible. Like French Canadians can never take care of their children. So, but it says here the characterization of the family is essentially inaccurate. Um, and one of the other newspapers actually wrote something to combat that because they felt compelled to say something. They said the assertion that Victory had been given away by her parents' consent is as devoid of truth as the writer of writer is of intelligence. So basically, he's saying the person who wrote this is stupid as hell. While they are not wealthy, the Ploufs are as well-to-do as people generally are in their locality, and they have never asked aid of anyone. So what he's saying there is, yeah, they're not rich, but at no point are they at begging for help. And they've taken care of their business. So, and everybody they live around is living the same way. So there's no one's better, no one's worse than the other. So the day after the hearing on October 29th, a Mr. Payne of Hardwick, Vermont learned of Victory's disappearance and recalled an incident of 1 or 2 days previous. So he said there was a couple passing through and they had knocked on his door and asked to warm themselves at his fire, and that they had a little girl with them and she was ill. Now, if you remember, when Victory went missing, she was suffering from whooping cough. He also said the little girl looked to be about 3 years old. Family remained at Payne's house for a short while, and then they left. But when he saw the child, and saw the fact that she was sick and saw how old she was, it made him think of Victory. Because this had already been all over the papers by this point. And then this couple showed up again at another place, and someone else recognized the same similarities between this child and Victory. But when the police tracked these people down, they come to find out the child was actually theirs. It wasn't Victory. So they started seeing, Phantom Victory Ploufs in places. Um, and then there was another case where in Boston, somebody said that they had found her and she was in police custody and that they wanted them to come down there and identify her, and they never did. So don't know if that child was her or not. But according to this, they're saying that Victory's mother said that wasn't Victory. So winter settled, snow fell in the camps, clearings of West J, and then Victory's name vanished from the papers. And the last mention of her was in January of 1880. Um, and it says here the lost Ploof child at West J has never been found, and the affair remains a deep mystery. Not one trace has ever been discovered of the child, and how she could have been taken away without a faint trace of her is an enigma. This is good writing. The excitement long since died away. It is said that her mother feels quite indifferent about it and does not allude to her child. Many believe she knows where the child is and may have given it back to its true father. So, when you have such a small town like that and you have something that significant happening, what do? A lot of people would just move away, start over. Not the Ploufs. So, they ignored the gossip. They remained in West J for another 20 years, outlasting even the factory that he worked for, which burned down in 1882. When they did leave in the end, they had a daughter named Rosa in 1885 and died in 1898 from a hemorrhage following a tooth extraction when she was 13. And then soon after that, that's when they moved to Massachusetts, back to Massachusetts. In 1900, the census found them living in Grafton, Massachusetts. And the Plouf's responses to the census indicate that Mary had given birth to 11 children, 7 were still alive, and that at this point, Victory had been gone 21 years and it was not included among the living. So they acknowledged she was not there. Mitchell Ploof passed away in 1917, followed by his wife Mary in 1937, and they are buried together in Northbridge, Massachusetts. And I think this is actually some of the saddest part right here, but I understand why. Victory Ploof has no headstone. There is no record of her birth. Well, actually, I should say no record of her birth does not survive. And really nothing to indicate that she ever truly existed, except for these news articles. Um, and in the absence of record, she remains unknown and unknowable. And She is fixed in time, a figure from an old photograph, 3 years old at the time of her disappearance, and she doesn't age but only fades. So very, very sad, but some possibility. They give a theory here about what they think may have happened. The author does. It says her face is red and swollen and she's crying. Her neighbor, John Bell, approaches. Don't cry, he says. He takes her hand, leads her away. Afterward, he hides the body and returns to work. He knows he will be suspected, attempts to deflect attention from himself. He invents bear tracks where there are none and coerces his son Edson to come forward with his story of meeting a strange man at the Papineau house. That is one possibility. Or alternatively, Bell was right. Maybe it was an animal attack. Um, because 2 years prior to Victory's disappearance, a story circulated in the Vermont papers describing how a person by the name of Thomas Peggington of East Richford was attacked by a panther or catamount in the early hours of April 19th, 1877. He says he was unarmed and he had wrestled the cat off a rocky ledge onto a frozen like ground below, and he hit his head and lost consciousness. Then when he woke back up, he had found that the panther had basically gone back to the woods. Now, according to the research, Thomas Peggington never existed, and there is not any vital records in the state of Vermont on this case or anything else. But if it is true, and again, you keep in mind you're living in the wilderness of Vermont, there are animals. I mean, way more than what we would see now. You have panthers, cougars, bears, wolves, coyotes, all of that stuff. And they were in much bigger, massive amounts in 1879 than they would be today, you know. So so I think it's quite possible she was grabbed and drug off by an animal. It's quite possible. It's also possible that she could have been grabbed by a stranger and drug off. I think the fact that there's lack of blood and torn clothing leads more to that one. But the author has one theory left, and this one also is very plausible, and I think most likely is the scenario that happened. This is what I think actually happened. It says, and this is all taken from These Dark Mountains, Historical Vermont Crime. Just so you know, this is the article I'm pulling from. And I'm going to read this word for word. Frank Ploof doesn't turn around. He disappears into the trees, and Victory goes after him. Now, Frank being her older brother, closest to her in age. So you understand who he is. She reaches the woods but doesn't see him. So he is smacked her, turned around, walked away. She goes after him. He disappears. She can't find him. She doesn't see him, but keeps going. He must be up ahead, she thinks, but he isn't. She loses the path and starts to run. Scared now, a rabbit in flight and no one pursuing her. Dinner time comes and goes, and it's colder, the air awash in wind and flurries. The shadows lengthen and run together, and the woods are all one darkness. Her feet are numb because remember, she did not have shoes on. She seeks for shelter in a cleft of a rock, a hollow snag, and she's still there. Kind of eerie. And it's possible that she ran to a cave or something and just crawled up there for warmth and succumbed to the elements. Hypothermia is a real thing. And she's only 3 years old, so she probably could not produce the body heat necessary to keep herself warm. But that is possible because, again, like I said, it's 1879. Animals are everywhere. It's probably there's no light, there's nothing. It's dark. You climb. There's a cave. Well, I'm gonna go into this rock, and she's still there. They may not have looked there. Very sad case. You never want a child to go missing. You never do. But that is the story of Victory Ploof. So if you have not already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, share, comment, like, all that good stuff. Like I said, this was the one for Vermont. I'm not sure which state will be next, but I'm going to be doing one a week. It's going to be the oldest unsolved missing children crimes for each state. So Vermont was today. Next week, I'm not sure who I'm going to be doing, but you'll find out when I get there. I have been thrown some more local cases. One's a missing person case that still hasn't been solved, and one is an unsolved homicide. from the Greensboro, Winston area, both of them. And I'll be researching and doing some stories on that. But be on the lookout for that. Those will most likely be live as like this. And let's see. Can't think of anything else. So, like I said before, this is Rebecca with Red True Crime. Thank you for tuning in for this little historical case. And hug your children, love them, because tomorrow is not guaranteed. So, this is Rebecca with Red True Crime. Have a good night, and thank you again for tuning in. Bye.